Well, hey, this is Tony Cannuli with HBRN Leadership Factory with Orrin Woodward. Today is another Leadership Factory. I'll tell you, these Leadership Factories have been going so well. You know, Orrin's been bringing on some phenomenal guests, and today we have another phenomenal guest that Orrin will introduce here in just a minute. Also wanted to let everybody know that tomorrow's Thanksgiving. I want everybody to have a blessed and amazing holiday with their friends and family. God bless all of you, and enjoy the time with your family. Now, for those of you that are joining us that are not familiar with the Leadership Factory Hangout, it's a promotional hangout by the Home Business Radio Network. I have my own show called the Slight Edge Zone. I'm also the marketing director. Orrin Woodward, the gentleman that is on the factory today, Leadership Factory today, is a gentleman that's been in our profession for over 2 decades now. He's one of the top leadership gurus in the world. He has several best-selling books. And today we've got a gentleman he's going to introduce. I'm going to turn it over to Orrin. We have Dan Hawkins. Dan's up in Wisconsin, and he's got an amazing story. So with that, my friend, welcome today. Welcome, Dan, and let's let her go.
All right. Thanks, Tony. You know, I'm excited for this interview. I've been excited for the last week knowing that everybody's going to get a chance to hear from Dan and some of his story, because what a story of overcoming we have here. I mean, we're talking about a mechanic and daycare provider. That was their professions, Dan and Lisa's professions. And yet now they're some of the top leaders in all of community building. And so, Dan, my first question for you is kind of simple. I'd love to just give a little background for all of the listeners on kind of how you got started in this crazy industry, and you know, maybe just a little bit of some of the things that you had to overcome in order to break through some fears and to launch your journey.
Okay, well, hey, first off, Orrin and Tony, thank you guys so much for inviting me to talk with you guys today. I think I've watched every series you've put out so far, and I'm blown away every time with the stuff I can learn with your guys' commentary and asking questions. It's such a great program. Thank you guys for doing that. I guess I'll just share a little bit, you know, as you talking to Orrin the last couple of days about getting ready for this and thinking through how I ended up where I ended up today. It's kind of, sometimes I always joke around and say I wake up every morning and pinch my wife Lisa because I can't believe it's real, you know, all the way we've come. And I was thinking back, and it's just almost a decade ago when I was first introduced to this program and this home-based business idea. And I was thinking, just to take you back, about 10 years ago, I was an auto mechanic, worked for my stepdad actually, and my wife ran her own daycare out of our house. We had 8 kids running around the house all the time, with one of them being ours, the other 7 being others. And at that time, I became an auto mechanic only for the reason that, like Orrin said, I was so shy and lacked confidence. My stepdad had his own dealership, and it was easy for me to walk right out of high school, right to the dealership, and start working for him and just stay in that comfort zone. And I always loved working on cars because I could hide in the back corner. You know, cars don't talk back. You don't have to argue with cars. I could just be by myself, focus, and fix a car. And Lisa, like I said, had the daycare. And along comes our photographer that did our wedding probably 3 years prior to share home-based, this concept, this profession with us. And we had just purchased a new house. I was telling Orrin the other day, we started newly married. My wife was pregnant. We're looking for a home, and we had all this list of criteria of stuff we wanted in a house. And by the time we found the house, about everything we wanted, we had to whittle it down to the one we could afford, which was basically the cheapest house in our entire town. I mean, literally the cheapest house for sale. That's the one we walked into, and it was about half remodeled at the time. We had to turn one of the closets into a bedroom for my new daughter. It was just barely big enough to, I don't think it had a window. It had the crib and a rocking chair, and you could basically pick the kid out of the crib without leaving the rocking chair. Just a small room. And there we are. My wife's 10 months pregnant. We're on the roof. We had to re-roof the house just to move into it. And there we sat. And it's kind of, like I said, I never pursued more because I was afraid. I lacked confidence, like Orrin said. And I remember the day that they came in and they shared this idea. Like I said, our wedding photographer from 3 years prior gave us a call out of the blue. And my wife set up the appointment. I really wanted nothing to do with the phone call. I tried to stay late at work and say I'm working overtime. And we sit there and we hear this idea. And here's where I was in the moment. I remember thinking, over here, I loved the concept of what was being offered and what the possibilities were. But over here, I was a person that I thought I could never, ever see myself accomplishing it. And there's this huge gap in between the possibilities and who I was. And I just remember that night, I couldn't sleep. I laid there thinking, man, what if we could do this? And I remember thinking, what if my wife does this and gets us wealthy? That'd be great. And That didn't quite work out that way, but I struggled with that. So my first introduction to home-based business, I was so blown away with the possibilities, but yet so intimidated by where I was and what I would have to do to accomplish it. And I guess so when I very first was introduced, that's where I was. I was thinking, boy, this sure would be great. I'm sure somebody could do this and it'd be great for somebody, but I don't know if I'm that guy because I saw all my weaknesses. But there I was kind of stuck between that chasm of understanding what's possible, but is it possible for me, I guess is where I was at that time.
Hey, Dan, share one of my favorite stories is when you were working as a mechanic and you had to interact with customers, or how you avoided interacting with customers. I mean, people are hard to believe that you have, thousands upon thousands of people in your business. You have thousands of people, showing up to events, all these great things, and yet they've really got to get a perspective of who you were before this business.
It's funny, like I was just saying, so I saw this chasm, so here I was, I knew who I was because I lived with myself 24 hours a day and talked to myself 24 hours a day, and here's where I knew I had to be in this business. And so just your example there, the way our shop was set up, it was kind of, we were all supposed to be, there's 3 of us that worked there, and our job description was all mechanics, but we were also all supposed to help the customer and check them out and go through their invoices, and that's the part I didn't like. So the way our shop was set up, there's this room that went behind the office where there was a window. And so when I would hear the front door go off, I would conveniently sneak back in that back corner and pretend I was busy back there and didn't hear the people in the front. And I'd kind of keep peeking through the window, and I'd give it anywhere literally up to 20 minutes before I'd finally give in and build up the courage to walk up front and go talk to this person. But most of the time, somebody else was able to sneak in there before I got in there, and oh darn, I was too late. I guess you got it. I go back to work.
So how did you overcome it? I mean, like you had these 2 voices going on, one saying, what look at the possibilities if we did this, but then look at who I am, I can't do this. What would you say, how did you get yourself to do something that was so uncomfortable or so unnatural for you? Because I think there's a lot of people listening that say, oh yeah, well, network marketing, oh, well, community building, sure for you, Orrin. Sure for you, Tony, well, yeah, of course you could do it for 20 years and be as successful as you are. Or Dan Hawkins, look how sharp he is. But they see the finished product. They don't see the process that had to occur to get there. So, Dan, is there any words of wisdom you could share with someone that maybe they're like you when they got started, they don't feel worthy or they don't feel capable of doing this? How did you walk through that process to become who you are today?
Yeah, that's great. And I have, obviously, when I go share my story, I have a lot of people ask that question. And sometimes it's hard to see yourself and to know what happened, But I think when I first heard the idea, like I said, I saw the possibilities, and it made sense to me. I could figure out that this was a great thing. But then doubting myself and what was the bridge between the 2? And I remember really early on, it basically I understood it was going to take courage to overcome these things and to do it. And I listened to a CD of yours, Orrin, I believe it was in our LLR series, and it was about mentoring matters. And you had a quote in there, you said, how many people can count on you to believe in them? And I thought that little statement right there totally sums up where I was, because I started to attend a couple of the functions that were running. And I remember to the point where, just to give you another example, I'd pull up in a car, and I knew they started at 8 o'clock. So I'd wait in my car till about 10 after 8. Because I wanted to avoid any time of communication in there that might have to take place. You walk into these meetings and people are friendly, they want to shake your hand, hug you, and do all this stuff. And so I'd wait in my car and I'd watch my clock, and okay, 8:10 rolls around, it looks like it's safe, the lobby cleared out, and I would sneak in the back and I would sit in the back and I would watch the speaker. I remember just listening to him, and I swore they spoke to my soul. They just spoke to the winner that's inside of all of us, but there's all this garbage on top of it. And they would just speak to that, and I would sit there and get so inspired, and then I'd pop up right as they sounded like they were wearing down. I'd pop up and I'd walk back out to my car and avoid the confrontation or the interactions. But it was those meetings when you hang around with winners. I've heard the statement many times. If you hang out with dogs, you're going to get fleas. If you hang out with winners and dreamers, you're going to get a dream and eventually win. And I just remember between the audios, listening to them over and over and over again. And just, I had to have someone speaking to me constantly that I could become that person that changes around. And association was so important, because most of the people in my life that I associated with at the time, they were looking to verify my failure, that, hey, look, I told you that wasn't going to work. Told you shouldn't get your hopes up. Told you're not that kind of person. And then when I hang out with people around this industry, they're saying, hey, you can become that person. You have it inside you. You can overcome that. And it was just, I had to immerse myself in that message. And I don't know how I figured that out early on, but I realized anytime I'm not around that, I talk to myself and start to increase the disbelief. Every time I'm listening to an audio or coming to an event, it increases that belief, and I shut myself up and start letting the winner talk to myself.
That's amazing. You know, Dan, let me ask you a question. You know, Napoleon Hill years ago, when he took 20 years and he went out and he studied the most successful people at the time in our day. Most of them were successful, not only multimillionaires, but many billionaires. And one of the things that they found is that the number one reason that people failed, this goes back to the 30s, was that they listened to their friends, family, and negative relatives. Now, you had some challenges in those lines, and you know, your associations that you just talked about on the positive side made all the difference in the world. What kind of challenges did you have in that sense with your family? Did you have a supportive family for the most part, or did you have a lot of naysayers? Did you have a negative brother-in-law that says, what do you think you're doing one of those, Dan? Go out and get a real job. Did you have that, like so many people do in the profession? And how did you overcome it? Was it the associations that really helped you through that, or was it more of what you listened to, what you watched, what you went to? You follow what I'm saying? It's interesting to look back, because it's been so long for me. I've been in the profession for so long, I almost forget what it was like, you know, when I was 18, 19, 20. I do kind of remember my relatives looking at me funny, but, you know, I went on from there, and the first time we were successful, we never had a problem from that point forward. But I know a lot of people, when they start, their friends and family, they're always trying to tell them what they think is the best for them. Unfortunately, they don't usually know what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, every one of those things. As you were talking, I kind of thought back, you know, one of my biggest critics when I first got started was actually my parents. And I was 26 years old. I just finished college. My plan was to take over my stepdad's dealership. And so I come to them with this crazy idea that I'm going to get successful in a home-based business. It hit hard. I mean, just to give you an idea, when I first got started, I went to my brothers and sisters, and I think I had enough influence with them where they all got started with me. And then I went and tried to talk to my mom. And basically, in about 2 days after talking to her, she had called all my brothers and sisters and convinced them to withdraw their applications and quit, because this was never going to work and it was a scam. And then she proceeded to tell everybody in my family that, hey, give him 6 months, this will wear off, he'll forget about it and move on. And she became one of my biggest critics. And what was interesting is we had to get to a point where even the holidays are coming up, and those can be pretty interesting when you're in this industry. Because I remember going to Thanksgivings and Christmases, and it was kind of like, no. First there was the rule, nobody's going to talk about it, or at least I'm not allowed to talk about it, unless they're going to give me their opinions about how it's not going to work. Then they can talk about it. And it was a hard first couple of years. It took 3 years, and so I had from my parents' side, and then I had from a friend's side. I shared with one of my great friends at the time. I thought he was one of my good friends, and we'll just call him Jeff because that was his name. But I showed him, he was all excited about it, and then after he did his research and thought about it, he actually emailed every one of my friends a message saying, hey, Dan's in this crazy scam, don't he's doing this home-based thing, don't get involved with him, just tell him you're not even interested. And basically, so at that point in my business, my mom had talked to all my family and convinced them that I was doing something crazy, don't get involved. My best friend emailed everybody that I went to high school with and said, hey, look, he's doing this, don't even talk to him about it. So now my whole names list, basically, of anybody to contact was wiped out. And I remember thinking that, and I think my shy, phlegmatic, stubborn side really was, I'm glad God gave me that personality at the moment, because it backed me in the corner, and it was either they were going to be right or I was going to be right, and I was just too stubborn to let them be right. And so I let it drive me. I remember for a long time I would told my mom, hey, someday I'm going to buy a BMW, and she just laughed, oh yeah, you'll get one of those someday. And so I told Lisa, the first thing I'm doing with my car is a donut in her front yard. Now, I don't recommend that, but that was just what drove me. I said, somebody's going to be right. And I had heard too much to that time and met too many people that were winners. And I remember thinking the only person who can truly tell you if this business works is someone who succeeded at it. Because by definition, if they failed, they don't know how it works. So how do they know if it would work? They haven't proved it yet.
That's good. That reminds me, Dan, of people of integrity expect to be believed. And when they're not, they let time prove them right. You are one of those people who you heard all the things that everybody else hears, and so many people after a while they hear that, they end up quitting, and then they start repeating the same stuff, But Sturgeon's law says 90% of the people will not accomplish success because they're not willing to go do what it takes. So understand that when you get involved in a business and you choose to be part of the 10%, by definition, if you want to be part of the 10%, you got to stop listening to the 90%. Right. So let's dive into this a little bit further. So there clearly has to be some things you had to learn. There had to be some skill sets dealing with people. I mean, if you're hiding out in the back when you're a mechanic, not even wanting to interact with people, now all of a sudden you have thousands of people that you interact with on a weekly, monthly basis. Give me some of the foundational principles dealing with people skills that you had to change, and are there some books or are there some techniques? How did you do this?
Yeah, that's great. And I talked about where I was and where I wanted to go, and that bridge was the association and the mentorship and the education I received through this. I mean, I didn't receive any of it through schooling, through college, or any of those things. And I remember early on, it got to the point where I said, okay, if I really want to do this, there's obviously some things I got to change. Like I would walk into a room and I'd see like George Gazzardo, one of the other Life founders, and he's kind of close to me at that time. And I'd watch how he went and would look people in the eyes and shake their hands. And I asked that very question, how did he learn that? And then I remember listening to an audio, like long before I ever got a chance to talk to you, Orrin, or mentor with you, or even sit down next to you, I was listening to your recordings. And I remember early on you saying that the #1 book you'd recommend to someone getting started to learn these core concepts of this industry was The Magic of Thinking Big. And I think now I figure out the other day, I've been through that book 12 times now. And I mean, my first copy was I was sharing the other day, it was so messed up that it's just a stack of papers now. The binder's gone, the cover's gone, it's all written in and highlighted and tabbed. And I was actually speaking about 6 months ago, and I dropped it off the podium, and it mixed all the pages up. And so now I got a new copy that I'm in. But I'll give you an example. In there, I remember reading, and it was either a recording I heard from you or George that said, be very specific and intentional about what you're learning in these books. It's not to entertain you like most people read today. Most people read to entertain themselves today. That's the only books that really sell. And we read intentionally, and I thought, I'm going to treat this like I'm going to school. And your chapter 6 or your resolution 6 in 13 resolutions, your resolves book, it talks about a scoreboard and really just keeping score on yourself and going through that PDCA process. And I didn't know that's what it was called at the time, but I knew I was bad with people, so I looked at the Magic Thinking Big, and I knew I lacked confidence. I mean, when I walked into a room, I'd joke around, I'd always let Lisa go in first, and she was my blocker. She would field most of the questions, and I could just stay in the background. And I realized that's not going to work here. That is not going to work in this profession. And so, like, they had the top 5 things to build confidence, and one of them was smile. And so I told Lisa, I said, we got to be real intentional. I said, I'm going to go into this meeting tonight, and I'm going to work on smiling. Like, that's the only thing I'm going to try and focus on. And I'd come out, and I'd be like, how'd I do? And she goes, well, you didn't smile at all, so how do I rate that? I just didn't do it. And so I would go into a mirror, and I would give my presentation, and I would smile looking in a mirror, and it was the hardest thing to do. And I realized I wouldn't get in with that guy either. He's totally boring, totally uninspired, did nothing. And so I'd have Lisa watch me. I mean, we developed a relationship early on where I said, hey, I'll be okay with it. You let me know. Did I smile as I talked to those people? And then just down that list, one was shake hands. I was terrified to do that in that process. But I think I had a guy ask me the other day, and I said, I think what happened was when I first started, I would try and do things that I knew I was supposed to do but was afraid to do. I'd kind of jump right in and try and do them because I wanted to win. And then I would scare myself or fail. And so then I would back off and withdraw. And what I learned is if I would just do a little thing every day, just work on something every day that made me overcome that fear, just something little, something I knew was pushing my fear zone, but I could do it. And then every day I would accomplish and tackle one of these things. And then I would look back and think, oh, that wasn't that big a deal. I can do another one tomorrow, and just be very intentional about what we were doing. Tony,
Dan is one of the top 10 leaders on the entire life community. I mean, we're talking one of less than 1,000. He's 1 in 1,000. Yet when he got started, there were 3,000 plus people showing up to events. I think at his first major function, there was already 3,000. So he gave 3,000 people a head start, yet he's moved up into the top 10. And if I were to summarize Dan, like his true gift is his intentionality. In other words, when he recognizes he's not good in an area and he has to get better, instead of doing what most people do is, yeah, someday I'll get better at that, he is intentional about moving towards whatever that Goliath is and conquering that Goliath so that he can move on in business.
Well, I can see that, Orrin. It's interesting, Dan. I'm amazed as I sit here and I watch you communicate, because I know you've been in the profession for less than a decade, your knowledge, your skills, your love of people, just your wisdom comes through, shines through, your transparency, your heart. You know, you've become a tremendous communicator. It's interesting that what you avoided eventually became one of your strengths, and that's so obvious. I can see that. And leaders are readers. Your law of associations, the mentorship, the fact that you're twice the student as you are the teacher, and then eventually become twice the teacher as you are the student. But it's interesting how much of a student you've become in the mentorship that's come through. I mean, I listen to what you have to say, and I hear what you talk about, and your understanding of this profession is amazing for the short time that you've been. So it's no surprise, Orrin, that Dan has become as successful in the profession as he has. And with that being said, you've learned some great things. Your story, what you had to go through with your family. I mean, I got to tell you that 1 in a million people probably would go through that. That's amazing. I mean, you get people in your family emailing your friends, don't do this. I mean, I can't even imagine that. I'll tell you, I used to always joke and say that when my family joins network marketing, it's time for me to leave. But the reality is I never had anybody calling up my relatives and saying, hey, no, if Tony calls you, don't talk to him. I never had anything like that. I don't know if I would have made it, to be honest. My biggest critic when I got started was my wife, because we had a '76 Buick Skylark with duct tape. It was MacGyver. We had the muffler hanging down. We had a 600 square foot house. And my wife's like, "You're going to get us from this to what?" And anyway, she was the biggest critic. But it was so funny because when we ended up 2 years into that business, we went from that little Buick to almost a $70,000 luxury auto sedan. And I can remember, we used to pull up into people's yards and blow the horn, and we used to hide. We'd meet people. We'd meet them around the corner, at night, so they couldn't see what we were driving. And then when we got that car, we'd pull in. We looked for any excuse we could to get them to come out to give them a book or give them a CD or whatever, just to show them the car. But what went on from that process to that was a nightmare for me. I'd come home at night and my wife would give me a hard time about building the business. Matter of fact, it fueled me on. I'd stay out later. I'd sometimes wouldn't get until midnight, 1 in the morning, just because I knew she'd be asleep, because she'd always beat me up because I was working really hard. But eventually what happened was once we hit a magical number, we got to like $10,000 a month in income. And from that point forward, it just like a switch flipped. And she said, wow, this business really does work. So I had the closest person to me, the one I had to live with, giving me that kind of flack. But I didn't have what you had. I would have been very difficult. But you took it and you used it to fuel yourself. And that's a message. You also learned that, hey, you can program yourself. And I learned that early on myself, is that whatever you think about will come about. Whatever you programmed into your mind, good in, good out, will manifest itself if you practice it. So you took the mentorship from Orrin and other amazing leaders. You listened, you read the book, The Magic of Thinking Big, and other books. You went to the events. You recognized your weaknesses, and then you realized that, hey, wait a minute, I can change them. And that's I'll tell you, magic happens when people realize that they don't have to be a victim anymore, Orrin, as you know, and they realize that they can actually do something to change it. And that's what you've had. I mean, your story is amazing. So let's move on further. And, we're coming into the holidays, of course. People will be meeting with their friends and family and all of that. And we got the new year coming up. And let's talk a little bit more about intentional and getting intentional and how to help people realize that they can clean their slate, that they can get intentional on what it is they want, what they want to change like you did, and where they want to go moving into 2013. And maybe we could shorten their time, Orrin and Dan. Maybe we can just shorten it a little bit, not quite as frustrating, and because you guys have both been through so much when it comes to personal and professional development.
Hey, Dan, why don't you finish that story with your mom and father-in-law, because I think it's got a great ending. And Tony, I'm not sure, Dan, if you finished that, but go ahead and finish that, because today I think they're some of the top leaders in your organization. It's just an amazing turnaround because you stayed committed, because of your integrity. Now their lives is changing, and they're changing hundreds of people's lives in their team.
Yeah, as Tony was saying that, I thought, I better finish this story or she's going to watch, and that's not going to end well.
Hi, Mom.
That's that quote Orrin said earlier. People of integrity expect to be believed, and when they're not, they let time prove them right. That was on the top of my toolbox at work, because I heard that on a recording early on, and I thought, somebody's going to be right. And I used to tell my wife that, hey, someday my mom's going to be one of our groups, because she was a personal development fanatic long before I even learned about this industry. She had quotes of John Maxwell up on her walls, and she already had gone through a lot of this stuff. And to me, this was perfect for her, but she just didn't see it because of past experiences. So we go through that whole process, and about 3 years in, she starts to recognize changes in me. I start to stop by her work, and we're having conversations about great books that I'm learning from the system, or CDs I'm listening to, audios, and I'm able to share what I'm learning. And she's blown away by what I'm learning through this business that she had framed as something else. And so that kind of got her interested. Well, long story short, she ends up coming to a seminar because my wife basically tricks her, for lack of a better word. She tells my mom, she calls her up and says, "Hey, it's Dan's birthday on Saturday. What are you doing?" And, of course, my mom's thinking, well, nothing. Sure, I'd love to do something. Great, we have a seminar. Why don't you come with us? And it was interesting because here's Orrin and Lori were the speakers coming in. And I was going to give a 10-minute promotional talk during the middle. It was my first time in front of a couple thousand people. And she tells my mom, "Hey, Dan's going to be up in front of a big group of people." Mom says, "He's going to speak in front of a group of people." She goes, "I got to come just to see that. Like, I'd never see the day my son would be on a stage speaking in front of people." And she comes, for those reasons. But by the time Orrin and Lori were done with her, she was completely sold out. She went home and woke up her husband and said, "We're doing this." And now today, just last week actually, we were in front of a group of 200 people. And my mom was the first speaker, led off the night, and her and her husband were the speakers. And I came up and closed up. And it was just so cool to see the transition of where they were and understanding that. And they've watched the process of people around them. And now, yeah, they're one of our top leaders. They're speaking all over the country. And now they're inspiring others through their story that, hey, it's okay to change. It's okay to, they had to, for lack of better words, eat a lot of crow at some point and humble themselves to say, we were wrong. This is something we didn't think it was. Help us. And now they're doing just phenomenal at it.
And to their credit, they did that. And because so many people, once they've dug their heels in, say, "Oh no, I've already made my decision on that." But to their credit, they made the change. And since we're talking about relationships anyway, and family relationships, why don't we talk about you and Lisa? Because I know that you guys were very intentional in your marriage as well. And Dan, you naturally a phlegmatic personality, Lisa naturally a choleric personality, and having to kind of work together. Have there been some changes in your marriage and how you guys work together from this business? And I know you've got some great stories to share from one of the big weekends. I know that you guys got in a nice discussion, let's call it, on the way home from that meeting. But I just am amazed at how you guys work together. You guys complement each other so well. So I've never seen this Dan and Lisa conflict. But I just think you have a great story around that.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Tony was saying about his wife not being excited about it and being his stumbling block. Lisa, I don't think she was ever super negative about what we did. Initially, she didn't want to be involved, and I know it's because she saw, okay, here's a people business, and my husband's going to build it. That'll be the day. So she I thought, just saw it as, this is never going to happen. Why sell out to something that's never going to happen? And so at that time in our life, Lisa did. I kind of took the back seat in a lot of areas, and she was more driven, and she handled the finances. She made most of the decisions. I checked with her what we were doing this week, and she ran the calendar. I mean, pretty much it was all that, and I was okay with it. I just worked and stayed in the background. And we got involved in this, and I loved working with Orrin and Lori and all the founders of Life that I get to work with now. Well, back then, they were all such a great example of how a relationship could be and should be, and how they complement each other and work together. And we started to come to certain events, and Lisa was coming more on board. And the weekend Orrin was talking about is we went to a whole weekend where it was Lisa's first time where she actually came away from the kids, left the kids with a babysitter, and we were sitting in this event, and we were watching all these great couples, and she was seeing how their relationship was, and basically we saw this giant gap to where we were and where we had to become to be successful here. And I was so mad at her because, I hadn't had time to meet Orrin yet, and Orrin was giving the last talk of the weekend. And we got in a big fight in the hallway, and Lisa's like, "We're out of here. We're leaving." I said, "We're staying." And that argument didn't last long, and we were in the car on our way home. And my poor dad was with us at the time. He was sitting in the front seat. Lisa would sleep for about an hour. It was about a 9-hour drive, and she'd wake up. We'd argue for about an hour, and then she'd sleep for an hour, and then we'd argue for an hour. And my dad just kind of sat there, and he was very quiet. He made me look outgoing, so he would just stared at the road and didn't pay attention. And we get home that night. We fought through the entire night. We were fighting about probably 12 o'clock at night, midnight. We're still fighting. And to this point in our life, we had never learned how to truly communicate and to work through stuff. So normally we'd go to sleep and just wake up mad and not talk for 3 days, and eventually it'd pass. Well, this is the first time, just based on stuff we were learning. I think at that weekend we both realized we wanted the life that was possible, but we weren't the people that were possible, and we saw that gap. And I remember we were sitting there, and we're laying there that night, and we were fighting back and forth, and Lisa just finally looked at me, and I told her, I said, here's the deal. I said, I know you don't believe in me, but I'm going to do this. It's the right thing for our family. It's the right thing for our future. I'm going to do this with or without you because I know it's right for us. And I know you don't believe in me now, but I'm going to make you believe in me. And that kind of stopped her. Like, this is the first time I ever said something like that, like took a leadership role in the house and was actually saying I'm going to accomplish something. And then I went on, then she asked me, well, why should we do this? And I remember I sat there and we're laying there and I start to describe, because I'd been visualizing what our future in this business was going to be like. And I started to paint a picture of, hey, there's going to come a day, and we had been looking at this house that we'd been dreaming on a little bit that first year, and I explained how we're going to drive up this, quarter-mile driveway, and as I come over the hill, I'm going to be in my new Mercedes, and I'm going to be able to look right through the house because it's all glass, and you and the girls will be riding horses. And I kind of just painted a picture of why we were doing this and what it was going to mean to us. And I looked over at her, and she's just crying, just a wreck. And she looked at me and she said, let's do this. Let's do it. And that was like a turning point where we started to actually look at each other and say, okay, what do we need to work on? And we heard all the time from stage, hey, get it together at home, and you'll build this business. And that was the moment where it turned, and we started actually focusing on getting things right.
Wow. That is such a powerful story, isn't it, Tony?
It's amazing. That's an amazing story, and it goes to show you, Orrin, that when you have a strong enough why, the how doesn't matter. You can hear this throughout the whole interview today with Dan. Is that, he had everything going against him, more than most could tolerate. But because of his strong internal drive and why, and he wanted more for him and his wife and his family, he saw that. He had the vision. He painted that vision. He saw what it could be like. He saw people like you and said, wait a minute, I can do this. I can be like this. And he went out and did it. And eventually, it's funny how you'll be rewarded when you stay the course, and that integrity of staying the course. And the naysayers realize it's like, well, hey, Dan's here. This is what he's going to do, and he's not going to stop doing it just because we're negative on it. And that's a wonderful story. I mean, you've got one of the best stories, Dan, that I've heard in this profession, I think, ever. I mean, it really is truly amazing. And let's talk a little bit more, and also about the financial, because I understand that financially things were challenging in the beginning as well. What was that like to overcome? Because most people, especially in today's economy, are having some challenges. Although I think the economy is more of a mindset than it is anything, in my opinion. But that's just my opinion. What's your thoughts on that? What was that like to overcome in the beginning?
Yeah, just last night I was sharing in front of a group of people that when Lisa and I joined this profession, it was a few $100s to get started. And we literally, when we decided to get started, we took all the cushions off the couches, got all the change out. We went to all our vehicles, emptied out the ashtrays. We went through all of our drawers and got every bit of change to come up with the $300 or whatever it was to get started. And I remember doing that. Like, hey, we had to carve everything. And then as we started to move forward, Claude Hamilton, I think he's been on here before, one of the Life Founders, he shared a talk once, and he said, so many people, they learn to balance their budget so well. They got $3,000 coming in and $3,000 going out. And so anything extra wrecks that balance. And so we realized, hey, there's going to take some investment of money and time. We got to find something in our life we're willing to give up so we can move forward. And so it was the cable TV, the little things. We started to recognize that we didn't have the money to build this business in the beginning, but we wanted the results of it, so we knew we could find the money to build this business in our budget somewhere. But it's, again, being intentional about our finances, just really looking at them and being honest. What are our needs and what are our wants, and where are we wasting some? I think everybody has room in there.
Well, I know, Dan, speaking from my perspective, I think you've always done a great job of investing in the seed wheat. So many people, they'll eat their own seed wheat, and then they don't have any seed to plant for a harvest down the road. Where you were very relentless on cutting out, again, intentionality of finances. You cut out any frivolous expenses outside of the absolute essentials so that you had some money to invest. I'm amazed at how many people get in their own business and they need to get the proper tools or the proper ammunition in their business in order to win, and yet they are cheap on the investment. And if you think about it, in community building, do you know the #1 investment is in yourself? If you get yourself right, then of course people will follow leaders. And so, Dan, your whole transition is because you cut out some of the frivolous expenses, invested in yourself, and now today, I mean, Tony just paid you one of the biggest compliments. I mean, you got one of the most powerful stories in this whole business, in this whole profession, because it's such a story where everybody would have said, your own mother, who we know loves you greatly, she even said, she called her own brothers and your own brothers and sisters, said, don't bother, it's a 6-month deal and he'll be out of it. And so that's coming from your family, and yet today, because of the courage of your intentional changes, now you've got your mom and father-in-law are some of your top leaders. Your dad's building a great business. You've got brothers and sisters involved. You've radically changed the whole Hawkins family because of the courage. The spine that you displayed is now building spines in a whole bunch of other men and women, and you're making changes one person at a time, which is why I get so fired up every time I talk to Dan, because he's exactly the model of what I want to do in culture in general. Is inside of every person, there is a leader, Tony. Inside of every person, there is a great champion crying to get out. And if you can just get your philosophy right and understand, in life you got two choices. You either hate losing enough to make the changes, which is Dan Hawkins, or you hate changing enough to lose, which is 90% of the world. And so this whole leadership factory, what we're here talking about is get intentional about change. Get intentional about growth. Get intentional about your success. All network marketing is, all community building is an opportunity. It's as good or as bad as you make it. But if you don't get intentional about success, you cannot walk into this profession and to be a champion the caliber of a Tony Cannuli, a Dan Hawkins, or some of the other top leaders out in the profession. If you want to be a champion, you've got to get intentional. You got to look and say, how are my relationships with other people? How am I doing in my finances? How am I doing in my ability to speak in front of people? How am I doing in my ability to have character and really follow through? My worth is my word. All of these essential things, you get that together. I just want to close with one more thought, Dan, to ask you. You sold a vision to your wife that day and you said she was crying. Well, tell me your reality today, because, you know, I teach vision is tomorrow's reality expressed as an idea today. So to send off for this leadership factory, why don't you paint a picture, not of the dream, but paint a picture of your reality today. Where are you right now?
It's really, even when I think about it today, I couldn't have mapped this out or really figured this out myself or painted this picture back then. But so that night, we were actually, it was funny, we just started to believe in the fact that we could start to dream and think bigger, and man, someday we'll be able to get this life. And so we started doing something called dream building, and this house, 10 minutes from our home at the time, 10 minutes from, we were living in a 1,000-square-foot house that was half remodeled, half undone, all these issues. And we go out and we look at this 8,500-square-foot house on 20-some acres, and a horse barn, and a second shop that is bigger than our house. The second garage is bigger than our house we're living in. And we just walked through this house, and I remember walking through it, and you walk in the front door, and it's the big glass where you can see right through the house to the backyard, and got the bridge across the top, and our kids are picking out rooms, and we're just dreaming about it. We went home and put that picture up on the wall of our house and got so excited about that, and that's what we talked about. That's where we pictured ourselves in it. It wasn't just the house. It was being free in that house and having freedom with our kids and time and homeschooling and all these things. And I remember we had it up there, and then that house actually sold. It got off the market. But we already had our dream in full gear. We knew we were going to live that life, so we kept marching forward, and we bought a house in between, upgraded it, had another house, and we were starting to get to the point where things were really coming together. And I was talking, mentoring with Orrin, like, hey, here's where our finances are, and maybe it's time to get our dream house. And like right about the time Orrin and I started that conversation, the very house that we had talked about, the very house that kept Lisa in business, that made her cry that night, that made her realize this is worth it, popped back on the market. And Orrin's like, all right, well, why don't you just put your house up for sale, and you could buy it probably, but just put your house up for sale. If that happens, man, the Lord wants you to move. And we're in, what kind of market we're in this last year here. Nothing's selling anywhere. My subdivision was the nicest subdivision in the last town we lived in. Not a single house had sold in over a year. We put our house up for sale, and 11 days later get an accepted offer on it and sell it. And so here we go back. This house is for sale. We make a deal. We move into this house that we're in now, the very house we looked at 8 years earlier, and kept Lisa in the business. And it was funny, Orrin, because Monday night, I think it was, I noticed that the garbage didn't get taken out, and now I have a guy that works for me that handles all the stuff around the house, and normally he takes the garbage out for me. So he forgot. So I'm like, all right, I'll take it out and go out to the garage, and we have this cool UTV all-wheel drive thing that, I usually will pick the garbage up and throw it in there. Well, the garbage was too heavy, so I'm like, all right, I guess I'll just walk it down the driveway. And so I'm pulling this garbage can down this quarter-mile driveway, and I get all the way to the end, drop it off, and I'm coming back. And the way my driveway works now, there's like a hill that you crest, and that's when you first see the house about halfway up the driveway. And I'm walking back Monday night here, just a couple nights ago. Beautiful skies. It was actually a warm Wisconsin day, and it's at night, so the house is all lit up on the hill, and all my buildings are all lit up. And I'm walking over that hill, and I thought, this is so crazy that in the last 9 years, I go from a 1,000 square foot house to an 8,500 square foot house. This property, 21 acres, is all ours, and I'm just walking over this hill, just tears in my eyes, under the sky, and I'm just thinking, that's what we offer people. We offer people in the next 10 years, they can change everything about their life. Like I thought in that moment, all of our relationships flashed in front of my mind. The thought that probably on Thursday, I'll be setting up a whiteboard in Thanksgiving, teaching my family how to build a business because they no longer are critical, they're building it with us. The thought that Lisa and I finally got our relationship right, and now we're the happiest we've ever been. And it's just amazing. And the example, because both of our parents have been divorced and remarried multiple times, and we're the first generation that's not going to do that in our family. And as I'm just standing there looking at my house thinking, that's what we offer people. We offer people this incredible idea that they can become whoever they want to become and live the way they want to live. And where else is that being offered? And to think back the things I had to go through and the criticism and the money problems, I would do it all twice as long, twice as hard for half as what we have now. And the relationships and being part of the life organization with Orrin and Lori and the friendships, and in about 5 days from today, we're heading down to join you guys in Florida, and I'm going to be down in Florida for a few weeks, a month or so, right next door to Orrin and Lori Woodward. Just amazing what can happen in the next 9 years of your life if you're intentional and decide to change and become who you were meant to become. Because I love what Orrin said. Everybody has that flicker inside. That's my favorite part of building a business, I think, now, is when I sit across from that guy who obviously doesn't believe in himself, and just know that I could be the guy who will believe in him long enough so he can believe in himself and become who he's supposed to become all along, that the world just locked him out of it. So I appreciate you, Orrin, so much for giving me this opportunity to just try and go out there and help others do what I've done. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you, Dan. Tony, any closing thoughts?
I am in such amazement in watching this hangout. Has been phenomenal. There's so much going through my mind, but for those that are watching here, I want you to take this one thing home. What Dan has demonstrated, that in less than 10 years, as he had just got done saying, that he went from, he was, when they first got into the business, when they first started in community building, they had the cheapest house. And look at the transition in their life, their family, their relationships, everything in less than a decade. And it goes back to one of my biggest belief systems in the profession, Orrin, is that network marketing truly is the greatest personal development course. It just has a compensation plan and a product attached. And Dan's a perfect example of it. The law of associations, the mentorship from people like yourself. It's in 9 or 10. Just think about it, everybody. Get intentional and don't be cheap. Invest in yourself. Jim Rohn always said it, invest twice as much into you that you do anything else. Twice as much into your business as you would into your job. And your business is you. It's all about you. It's the you factor. That the economy doesn't matter. Who's the president doesn't matter. Your negative friends and family don't matter. And Dan's a great example of that, isn't it? And looking at today, they're as big as supporters. So none of that matters. Whether you have people skills, that doesn't matter because you can develop those skills. Even your desire and drive you can cultivate if you're around associations that can help you cultivate that in time. And in less than 10 years, you can change your entire life. It's like when you have an operating system on your computer, you can change that operating system. Most people in our country, in the world today, though, Orrin, they don't know they can. And that's what we're doing, is we're shining a light. And what you have done and what other leaders have done in the profession and what you've done within life is you've been shining a light, saying, look, this is the possibility. This is what we can do. And we're given that kind of hope. And I got to tell you, I'm so proud to be part of this Leadership Factory. I know it's doing a tremendous amount of good. Dan, it's been a pleasure to have listened to your story. I'm looking forward to developing a strong, long-term, lifelong relationship with you and doing other great work in the profession. Orrin, you know how I feel about you. You're amazing individual. You're to me, I just doesn't get any better. You demonstrate what this profession is all about. So with that being said, everybody watching this and moving forward, I wish you the greatest greatest happy Thanksgiving from HBRN. We appreciate you taking the time to watch. Orrin, my pleasure. Dan, thank you so much once again, and we'll talk to you all soon. I'll turn it over to you, Orrin, for last moment, because I always love to hear what you have to say at the end.
Just real quick, dreams come true to those who are true to their dreams. And Dan and Lisa are living a dream lifestyle today, because in those dark moments when most people quit, they persisted and moved on to the next level. And so I wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. Dan Hawkins, thank you so much for being on the show. And for Tony Cannuli and myself, we're signing off. This is the Home Base Radio Network Leadership Factory.